Okay, so yesterday, we made two charts, right? So chart number one looks like this. It was our 30, 45, and 60 degree trig values. Yes? Everyone remembers this chart? Okay. And then we did the second chart. These are for our quadrantal angles. So our angles that lie on our X and Y axes. Yeah? Okay. We also learned that sine and cosine represent what of an ordered pair? Your X's and your Y's. So when I'm going around from here to here, filling these in, first we're going to talk about what their angle, what the degrees are. So 0, obviously 0 degrees. What is pi over 6? What's 30 degrees? 30 degrees. What was pi over 4? What's pi over 3? What's pi over 2? What was pi? 180. What was 3 pi over 2? And coming back around to 2 pi gives us 360. Okay. So those are our basic angles, right? From these angles and using our reference angle, we can determine what the rest are, even if we didn't want to convert. Does that make sense? Okay. They're all equally spaced apart. They're all the way around. So this angle is pi over 6. It's 30 degrees. Its reference angle is 30 degrees. So that means that 5 pi over 6 and 7 pi over 6, their reference angle are also 30 degrees. That means for 11 pi over 6, its reference angle is also 30 degrees. Does that make sense? So what is the degree value of 5 pi over 6? If my reference angle is 30, what's my 150? What is the degree value of 7 pi over 6? 210. What is the degree value of 11 pi over 6? 330. Do we see how we use that reference angle? Okay, our next angle is our 45s. The reference angle in quadrant 1 is 45 degrees. So that means the middle angle, and all of these are going to also have the same reference angle of 45 degrees. What is 3 pi over 4 in degrees then? 135. What is 5 pi over 4 in 225? And what would be 7 pi over 4? 315. Last is 60. Quadrant 1 has a reference angle of 60 degrees. So all the angles there are going to have the same reference angle. So what is 2 pi over 3? 120. And quadrant 3, what is 4 pi over 3? 240. And then in quadrant 4, what is 5 pi over 3? 300. Okay. Do we see how the degrees are all related? And if I know quadrant 1, then I can figure out all the other ones. Yes? All right. Next, we're going to talk about our angles. And not the angles, the ordered pairs. So you can go through and label all of your quadrantals and your quadrant 1, because remember that your X, comma, Y are your cosine, comma, your sine values. So using your tables that we created yesterday, label your quadrant 1 angles and your quadrantal angles using their cosine and their sine. So using yesterday's notes, yes. Go back to what? Oh, we didn't do anything. This is it. This is where which part? The angles? Yeah. Oh. Our coordinates. So using your charts on examples number 10 and number 11, you should be able to fill in quadrant 1 values and all your quadrantals. Okay, I'm going to do my quadrantals first. Remember, this is a unit circle, so that means the radius is 1. So on my diameter out, it's going to be 1. 1, 0, right? Then 0, 1. Then -1, 0. And 0, -1. Yes? Okay. Now, when we talked about our angles, we said that your X and Y values are the cosine and sine of that value. So the cosine of 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 2. The sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. The cosine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2. The sine of 45 is square root of 2 over 2. The cosine of 60 is 1/2. The sine of 60 is square root of 3 over 2. Okay, now all of these come together by simply understanding how a coordinate plane works. When you're in a coordinate plane, you have 4 quadrants, correct? Quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Yes? Each quadrant is different based on the sign values of your X's and your Y's. Do you remember that? In quadrant 1, your X's and Y's are both positive. Agree? In quadrant 2, your X's are negative and your Y's are positive. In quadrant 3, they are both negative. And in quadrant 4, your X is positive, but your Y is negative. As long as you know this, you can fill in the rest of the ordered pairs. That's because they mirror what's happening in quadrant 1. Okay? Every angle that has the same reference angle will have the same ordered pair. Does that make sense? You can start from wherever you want. So if we started with 30s, the 30s that we did were this was a 30, this was a 30, this was a 30, this was a 30, right? So they're going to all have the same ordered pairs, but adhering to the signs of that quadrant. Does that make sense? So this one would be negative square root of 3 over 2. I'm listening, Emma. Okay. This one would be negative square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. This one will be positive square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. Do we see how that worked? That's why it's important for you to know quadrant 1, because if you know quadrant 1, then you know the rest. I'm listening. In quadrant 2, your X's are negative, your Y's are positive. It doesn't matter where the negative goes in the fraction. No, the 1/2 corresponds with 30. These are going to be the same. So like if you were to, I know I draw horrible, I'm going to highlight for you. So
yeah,
it's not from 90. Reference angles are only from your X-axis.
So 180 and 0. It could also be your.
No.
I was trying to think of that. That's why I was thinking.
Does this help? It's 30 degrees from the nearest X-axis. Reference angles we wrote in our notes are only from your X-axis. Okay? Your reference angles are only from your X-axis. So following this, same thing. Now if I'm looking at my 45s, all of the angles that have a reference angle of 45. This has 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 a reference angle of 45.
So all of those are 45 degrees.
So all of those have a reference angle of 45, which means they're all going to share the same coordinates, but adhering to the signs of the quadrant. Yes?
Yeah. All the rest
Okay.
different colors.
I mean, there's only one more to go. There's only one more to go. 60. So this has a reference of 60. 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 It is always from, and the rest are already set because they're ones and zeros. And negative ones. Okay? Yes? If we had time, we would have done our unit circle sun, but we didn't have time to make a unit circle sun, which is so appropriate for Pi Day today. But I know.
Let's do it.
I know.
No one said it. You all promised it.
All right. So you should be able to fill it in. Do we understand? So if I start writing them in, we understand why I'm writing things where they go. Yes. And so again, can't stress it anymore. Quadrant number 1 is super duper 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 important. Got it? Because if you know quadrant number 1, then you know everything else. Capiche? They just need to stop calling me. I'm tired of them calling me. I want to know how my phone number for my classroom became. Okay. All right. So, how I remember what things are. We're gonna kind of talk about it and see if we can make a pattern. So it says here, we're gonna identify in what quadrants will things be positive and which quadrants things will be negative. Okay. So keeping in mind our rules for the x's. So sine, that is our y. You see nothing. Sine is our y. Cosine is our x. There's a reason why I write sine first, so that when you do tangent, it's automatically y over x. Y over x. All right. So quadrant one. In quadrant one, are y's positive or negative? Y's are positive. In quadrant two, y's are. In quadrant three, y's are. In quadrant four, y's are. All right. Cosine, which is our x. In quadrant one, x is our. And quadrant two. And quadrant three. And quadrant four. And therefore, now you see how it's y over x, y over x, y over x. So tangent, therefore, is what? Tangent is? Tangent is? Tangent is negative.
Wait, why do we know that? Because
Two positives make a positive.
Oh.
All right, so how did my teacher teach us to remember this? She taught us as in quadrant one, all trig values are positive. In quadrant two, only sine and its reciprocal are positive. In quadrant three, only tangent and its reciprocal are positive. And in quadrant four, only cosine and its reciprocal are positive. This stands for all students take calculus.
Oh my. Wait, what is the A stand for?
All students take calculus. All are positive in quadrant one. Only sine is positive in quadrant two. Only tangent is positive in quadrant three. And only cosine. All students take calculus. Okay.